It's a frustrating time for all of us. Every time it happens, I wonder, should I dig into my access bond and spend on making sure my house is off the grid? Now, I read with great interest an article in Business Insider that said it would cost in the region of 200,000 Rand for an average four-person home to do just that. Is it worth it? Is it a good idea? And how do we do it? Let's speak to an expert on this now. Dr. Sam Duby is a multi-award-winning innovator and thought leader in the field of energy access. He consults widely across Africa as head of TFE. He joins me from our Cape Town studio. Sam, thank you very much for joining us. I really do appreciate your time on this Sunday morning. Many South Africans have already bought generators to get through load-shedding times. But should we be thinking about getting off the grid?
So it's a very interesting question because absolutely you should. It's not a very difficult thing if you have the collateral to go off the grid. It costs 200,000, as you say, to be completely off the grid, 100,000 if you still want to be connected to the grid and don't need batteries. Now that translates to being about R1.30 per kilowatt hour for the next 15 years. So when you're looking at the potential Eskom price hikes, it starts to make a lot of sense in the long term. Now that's obviously a lot of money to have up front, and not a lot of people can do that. So there are lots of quite interesting financial arrangements that most of the major banks will offer to 100% subsidize or pay for the solar system. So its affordability is not really the problem. The problem is much more of a systemic one. It's the fact that South Africa really needs to get out of the medieval dark ages of energy policy and allow residential homeowners, factories who do have solar panels on the roof to sell as much power into the grid as the grid will allow, because this will obviously give them a great incentive because they'll have a source of revenue. It provides additional incentive for municipalities and institutions like schools. It leverages the private sector, and it means that the problem of blackouts ceases to be quite such a threat. And most importantly, perhaps, it means the poorer South Africans who can't afford to put solar panels on the roof can benefit from the richer South Africans that do have the collateral and can. So essentially what it means is that the wealthier South Africans, by feeding cheap green power into the grid, will be benefiting South Africa as a whole, including the poorer South Africans, many of whom can't afford to pay the current Eskom energy rates, let alone those that are projected to be increased over the next few years.
So what you're telling me is actually quite exciting, that it's very doable if you've got the collateral, that even your bank will help structure a plan to help you with that initial outlay. It could cost in the region of between 100 and 200,000 Rand. Now, 200,000 Rand is if you go for the batteries, obviously the solar panels, solar geysers, storage, that sort of thing, and inverters. But also, you're saying that we need to move policy towards being able to sell the excess power that I might generate back to the grid. Now, my understanding, didn't the integrated resource plan that was released this last week talk about doing exactly that? How close are we to that reality?
So we're getting closer every day, and that's a very exciting, it's a very exciting time to be working in energy in South Africa. I just hope that it actually is, that policy does shift and that South Africa gets into line with the rest of the world, because it's probably Eskom's only chance of being around for more than the next couple of years. If they can be involved in that game, the embedded solar generation game, it'll be a good thing for Eskom, it'll be a good thing for electricity users in South Africa, would be a good thing for municipalities. But if they don't, and if the policies are not made quick enough and clearly enough, then it will be game over for Eskom, and it'll be a difficult and painful death.
So while the policymakers take their time, from a personal point of view, it's a good idea for us to be thinking about how we can take our individual homes off the grid. But what are the elements, Sam? You spoke about solar panels. Would you need an inverter and a battery? And where do I start, essentially?
So yes, I mean, it depends both on how much you want to spend and also how much you want to be off the grid. So in its very simplest form, the system would be solar panels on your roof and a simple inverter, and you'd be feeding all the power that you're not using directly at that time into the grid, and that would be called using the grid as a battery. Now, if you have a very sensible policy landscape that does make the best sense, because you can sell as much power as you make into the grid. Now, if you want to be totally off the grid, which a lot of people are very tempted to, then you have to add the battery storage solution, which would mean that you don't have to essentially pull any power back from the grid when you need it. So it really depends on how much you can spend, but the ideal energy future essentially doesn't require too much battery at the household level. It requires node-based storage systems at the systemic level. So where you have factories, where you have large areas of electricity usage, you should have very large storage systems like the ones they're building in Australia. But actually the sensible thing for homeowners and factory owners is essentially just to stick to the solar panels.
Sam, one of the things that I've heard is that in terms of policy, Eskom might be aware of people going off the grid and could be planning some sort of a levy. So very much like we pay a rental for our landline, Eskom might start bumping up a basic rental for those of us who are mostly off the grid but still need some access. Is that a possibility? Could they do something like that?
Yes, they absolutely could, and this is how Eskom can remain in the game, and this is how Eskom potentially could make sure that they maintain some kind of revenues, because obviously if people are going off the grid entirely with batteries, then Eskom don't really, and nor do the municipalities, have any scope for any revenues. So if they can sensibly apply levies or tariffs or taxes, call it what you want, that doesn't overly disincentivize people to install the solar panels, then that could work very well. And so the only chance Eskom can be involved is if you're dealing with the situation I described, where people are feeding all of their power back into the grid. You have wheeling, you have the ability for independent consumers, independent power producers to be putting power into the grid, cheap, green, clean power into the grid, and you get the chance for individual consumers like you and me to choose who we buy the power from. You can choose to buy power from this producer, that green producer, whoever it happens to be. You incentivize and you liberalize the market. But if there is this energy trading going on, obviously a cut can be taken by the person who is maintaining the infrastructure, the transmission lines, and that's where Eskom could be sensibly applying tariffs or levies. But it has to be done carefully, not to disincentivize the people with the collateral, as I said, in the private sector, to put the capital up front to get the solar panels in. We just need to get the solar panels in whatever way makes the most sense.
Thank you so much. That was Dr. Sam Duby from our Cape Town studio. He's from TFE Energy, telling us how to go off the grid.